Chapter 1. The Mortal Oath. The city of Sutek lay beneath a sky of unrelenting gold, where the sun reigned with the same terrible authority as its king. Its streets, lined with statues of gods and warriors, pulsed with the weight of centuries. The people, adorned in linen and gold, moved through the city with reverent silence, for today was a day of mourning. No laughter echoed, no music played. King Aken-Ra, Lord of Sutek, had died. Yet his rule had not ended. From the towering steps of the great mortuary temple, Sakir, high priestess of the Mortuary Cult, stood, bathed in the flickering light of oil braziers, watching as the funeral procession neared its final destination. Her hands, delicate in life but calloused from decades of ritual, tightened around the crook of command she carried. Below, the body of King Aken-Ra rested upon a massive black gold palanquin carried by 24 sweating slaves, their bodies trembling beneath its weight. His crown of ophidian gold gleamed beneath the sun, and his body, wrapped in sacred linen and scented oils, was anointed with the tears of the gods, a rare resin harvested from trees long extinct. His death mask, sculpted from obsidian and lapis lazuli, reflected the solemn faces of the gathered people, a ruler not gone, but merely waiting. The duty of the Mortuary Cult. Sikhet turned, her ceremonial robes whispering across the polished stone. Behind her, within the vast temple chamber, the other priests of the Mortuary Cult chanted the rites of transition, their voices a droning hum of power. Torches lined the cavernous hall, casting long shadows upon hieroglyphs that spoke of eternity, of gods, of kings, and of the dead who refused to sleep. The great sarcophagus of Aken-Ra rested at the temple's heart, its surface carved with the scriptures of awakening, words that would bind the king's soul to his earthly remains. Before it, golden urns held his heart, his liver, his lungs, all removed, purified, preserved. His warriors and most trusted servants, slain upon his death, lay upon the cold slabs of sacrificial altars, their mouths stuffed with golden sigils, ensuring their spirits would rise at his command. Sikhet closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. This was her purpose, to guide the king beyond death, to ensure his rule would never end. She had prepared for this moment all her life. She had sacrificed her childhood, her flesh, her name, and yet, a vision of chains, a whisper soft as shifting sand, slithered into her mind. Sikhet's breath caught. The temple faded. She was standing elsewhere, beneath a sky darkened by swirling black clouds. The golden sands of Nehekhara had turned ashen gray, and before her stood a vast, endless chain stretching into eternity. It was thick, forged of bronze and bone, pulsing with unnatural life. She followed its length and found herself staring at a figure, a withered corpse draped in rotting priestly robes. Its eyes burned like dying embers, hollow sockets filled with an unnatural glow. The chain wrapped around its throat, its wrists, its ribs, pulling it deeper into the endless abyss beyond. A voice, dry and cold, whispered in her ear, "Your soul is not your own." Sikhet staggered back, her hand clenching the crook of command. The vision shattered, and she gasped, her chest heaving. She was once more within the temple, the sacred torches flickering, the air thick with incense. Had anyone noticed? The priests continued their chants, oblivious. King Aken-Ra's sarcophagus awaited. She exhaled slowly. It was a test, that is all. Visions were common before sacred rites. Doubt was a weakness she could not afford. The Mortal Oath. She turned as High Priest Karathos, her superior, stepped forward, carrying an obsidian chalice filled with a sacred elixir of eternity. It shimmered black and gold, thick as honey and reeked of death. Sikhet met his gaze. "I am ready." Karathos nodded, though something flickered in his ancient, sunken eyes. "This is the final step," he intoned, his voice dry as the tomb's. "Drink, and you will walk the path of undeath, bound to King Aknar's will, forever his priestess, his servant, his guide. Do you accept this burden?" She hesitated. The vision of chains burned in her mind. "Your soul is not your own." Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the chalice, a final moment to turn back. But she had made her choice long ago. With steady hands, she lifted the chalice to her lips and drank. The elixir of eternity burned like molten silver, filling her throat with the taste of earth, blood, and decay. It slithered through her veins, a living thing, coiling around her heart, her bones, her very essence. Her breath caught, her vision blurred. Pain erupted through her body, a cold, unnatural pain that froze her blood mid-flow. Her veins blackened, her skin tightened, her very soul screamed as the elixir devoured her mortality. Her knees buckled, her breath escaping in a ragged, rattling gasp. She collapsed, the chalice slipping from her fingers, shattering against the temple floor. She tried to cry out, but her lungs had turned to dust. She tried to move, but her limbs were no longer hers. She tried to live, but life had abandoned her. The birth of a leech priestess. Sikhet's heart stopped beating. Her flesh withered, her nerves deadened, her mind burned away in a storm of necromantic power. And then, silence. She opened her eyes. The world was different. The torches burned dimmer, their light unable to touch her. The air felt thicker, heavier, filled with whispers she had never heard before. The priests around her continued their chants, their voices distant, irrelevant. Her skin, once warm, was now cold stone. Her vision sharpened. She could see the very threads of magic that bound King Aknara's sarcophagus, could hear the faint echoes of his soul, waiting in the void. She turned to the great sarcophagus of Akwen-Ra. She knelt before it, placing her hands upon the black stone. "Awaken, my king." The necromantic runes flared. The air howled. From within the sarcophagus, something stirred. And Sikhet, now undying, now enslaved, felt the first link of the eternal chain wrap around her soul. Yet in the depths of her hollowed mind, the voice whispered once more, "Your soul is not your own." Chapter 2. Awakening to the Tomb. Silence. Not the silence of sleep, nor the quiet of peace, but a heavy, death-laden stillness, thick as embalming resin, stretched across the ruined heart of Zan-Suteki. The city, once alive with the prayers of its priests, the clatter of chariots, and the whispers of scheming nobles, lay in eternal stasis. The palaces had crumbled into sand. The marketplaces stood empty, their goods long turned to dust. The once magnificent murals of the gods, carved into the towering walls, had been worn smooth by time, their divine faces erased. The great canals, which once carried water from the lifeblood river, had run dry. Zan-Suteki had not fallen in war. It had simply died, forgotten. Yet beneath the desert sun, it still breathed. For deep within the heart of the royal necropolis, the dead stirred. The return to life. Within the depths of the great tomb of Akhenera, an unnatural pulse throbbed through the darkness. The air, thick with the scent of ancient resins and rot, crackled with necromantic energy. The stone sarcophagi that lined the chamber trembled as the ancient words of power, inscribed into their surfaces, flared to life once more. And from the largest sarcophagus, the one marked with the sigils of eternity, something moved. Sikhet awoke. Her thoughts were slow, creeping like sand through a withered hand. The weight of centuries pressed upon her mind, but she did not feel the stiffness of flesh, the ache of weary bones. She felt nothing. Because she was nothing. A hollow breath rattled from within her ribs, the echo of lungs that had long since rotted away. Her eyelids peeled open, and for the first time in centuries, Her vision beheld the world of the living, if it could still be called that. She had returned. She raised one hand before her, studying it in the pale blue glow of the necromantic torches that flickered along the tomb walls. Where once had been bronzed flesh, marked with sacred tattoos, there was now only bone, dry and ancient, wrapped in the tattered remains of her priestly wrappings. A dull ache pulsed at the back of her mind, not pain, but something else. A calling, a pull, an unbreakable chain wrapped around her soul. She did not need to wonder who held the other end. Rise, Sikhet. The voice was everywhere, not heard through ears, but through the very essence of her being. It was a command deep and absolute, a force that permitted no disobedience. And so she rose. A kingdom of bones. She stepped out of her sarcophagus, the sacred chamber stretching out before her. Other figures were rising as well, priests, warriors, servants, their fleshless forms groaning as they moved for the first time in centuries. Their ornate gold-trimmed armor, their ceremonial robes, had aged but remained intact, preserved by magic more powerful than time itself. Beyond the tomb, Zan-Sutek called to her. As Sikhet emerged into the ruined streets, the sight that met her was one of glorious decay. The great statues of Akhnera, once pristine, had crumbled, their eyes hollow, their inscriptions worn to nothing. The great palace of the king, where he had once ruled in mortal life, stood as a husk, its pillars leaning, its walls stripped of the once brilliant murals that told his story. And yet, despite the ruin, the dead still walked. Before her, stretching out in vast formations, stood the armies of Zan-Sutek, now nothing more than skeletons in gilded armor, their empty sockets burning with cold blue flames. Their chariots, driven by desiccated riders, creaked as they pulled forward, their wheels grinding through the layers of sand that had buried the streets. No blood ran here, no breath was drawn. Yet this was a kingdom, and it was preparing for war. The will of the king. Sikhet moved with purpose, her skeletal fingers clutching the crook of command, a relic she had wielded in life and would wield in death. She made her way through the ranks of the dead, her tattered robes billowing, her movements unnatural, fluid, yet devoid of life. She did not need to speak. The dead did not require orders spoken aloud. Through the great sorcery of the Mortuary Cult, she could feel them, their minds woven into a single consciousness, bound to one will, one ruler, one master. Nehekhara, he had not yet awakened. But his will had reached across the veil, had commanded her to raise the armies, to prepare them for his return, to ensure that Zan-Sutek would rise once more. She lifted the crook of command high. A pulse of cold blue light erupted from her, washing over the assembled undead. The ground trembled. The ranks straightened. The dead snapped into formation, their once slack jaws clenching, their weapons raised, their bodies frozen in perfect readiness. A kingdom reborn in death. A war yet to come. Dreams of the past. But the dead were not supposed to dream. And yet, that night, as Sikhet stood in the silent ruins of her temple, gazing across the sands that had swallowed her home, she dreamed. A whisper, soft as shifting grains of sand. A vision, flickering at the edge of consciousness. She saw herself, alive, beneath the warmth of the Nehekharan sun. Her skin was golden with youth, her hair dark, woven with sacred beads, her eyes filled with purpose. She was laughing. But then the image shattered. The chains returned, thick, unbreakable, wrapping around her wrists, her throat, her ribs. And beyond them in the darkness she saw the shadow of something immense. A being greater than kings, greater than gods, lurking beyond the veil. Watching. Wait. Sikhet jerked awake, though her body had never moved. Her hands clenched, the crook of command digging into her skeletal palm. The vision was gone, but the unease remained. She turned her gaze to the tomb of Akenri, where her master slept in undeath, and for the first time in all her centuries of servitude, she felt fear. Chapter 3. Chains of the Undying. The whispers never ceased. They did not come from lips nor from tongues of flesh, but from the unseen, the endless echoes of the dead, bound together in the suffocating grip of eternity. In the ruined halls of the great mortuary temple of Zan Sutekech, the whispers coiled around Sikhet's mind like a serpent, tightening with each passing moment. The other leech priests stood in their sacred circle, motionless as statues. Their forms, once human, were now skeletal husks, wrapped in ceremonial linen, their hollow sockets glowing with cold, unnatural light. Their golden amulets, pulsing with necromantic sigils, marked them as servants of death, eternally bound to the will of Akenri. And so was she. Yet something was wrong. The chains of servitude. The mortuary cult had taught her that undeath was perfection, that to exist beyond mortality, to serve forever, was a privilege, not a curse. Yet the chains weighed upon her soul, and for the first time she could feel them. She stood upon the sacred dais, overseeing the rite of awakening, her hands raised above a corpse, its skin blackened and withered, its bones gleaming beneath half-rotted flesh. The incantation spilled from her lips as the necrotic energy surged, crawling into the corpse, wrapping around its brittle remains like unseen fingers. The body convulsed, the bones snapped into place, the sunken eyes flared open, twin blue embers staring into eternity. Another soldier for the eternal war, another slave to the will of Akenra. Another link in the unbreakable chain. A deep voice rumbled in her mind, low and commanding, a presence that drowned out all else. Good, Sikhet, you do not falter, you do not resist. It was his voice, the Tomb King. Even without his mortal body, Akenra's will was absolute. From the depths of his sarcophagus, sealed in his sacred tomb, his mind touched hers, unseen chains wrapping tighter around her soul. There was no thought, no freedom, only obedience. She lowered her arms, stepping away from the reanimated corpse. Yet even as the whispers of the undead faded, a new sensation burned at the edges of her mind. A memory, the vision of the living sun. Sikhet stood upon golden sands, her bare feet sinking into their warmth. The sun burned above her, but it did not scorch, it embraced her. The wind, filled with the scent of dates and flowering acacia, brushed through her hair, no longer a lifeless shroud, but thick, woven with sacred beads. She was alive. Her heart beat within her chest, and her breath filled her lungs. In the distance she saw Zan Sutekh as it had once been, its great walls gleaming, its palaces whole, its people laughing, singing, moving freely beneath the light of Ra. A voice, gentle yet sorrowful, whispered through the air. This is what was lost. She turned and her breath caught. She saw herself, not as she was now, but as she had been centuries ago, a woman of flesh and blood, her robes white as desert lilies, her skin warm beneath the living sun. Sikhet reached out, her skeletal fingers trembling. Her mortal self did not move. Instead, the golden sky darkened. The warmth faded. The sun above withered, turning black. The sands beneath her feet cracked, and from the earth rose the chains, thick iron-wrought things wrapping around her wrists, her throat, her ribs, dragging her down into the abyss. She gasped, but her breath was gone. She screamed, but no sound escaped her hollow throat. The darkness swallowed her, and she fell. The suspicion of the dead. Sikhet awoke in the chamber of the Liches priests, the torches burning with pale blue-green flames. The vision still clung to her, its touch lingering upon her bones. Had she truly felt warmth? Had she truly breathed again? Impossible. Yet as she rose, she felt the watching eyes of the other leech priests upon her. They had noticed. Nehekhara, a withered husk draped in ceremonial gold, stepped forward, his rotting lips parting in a hollow rasp. "You hesitate, Sikhet," he murmured, his voice dry as ancient parchment. "Your will falters." She met his gaze, empty sockets burning with a faint, cruel glow. "I do not falter." Nehekhara tilted his head. "Do you question?" She should have denied it immediately. She should have silenced such heresy with the truth of undeath. And yet for the briefest moment she hesitated. Nehekhara saw it. The other priests saw it. The whispers of the undead grew louder. "The king will know," Nehekhara rasped, "and doubt is a sin that is not forgiven." The call to war. Before she could answer, the great stone doors of the temple groaned open, and the voice of Aken-Ra filled the chamber, his will an iron grip upon their minds. "The time has come." The assembled priests bowed their heads. "We march to war." Through their bond, Sikhet saw the vision he willed upon them, the city of Nehekhara, a rival kingdom, its undead legion standing ready behind golden walls, its tomb king entombed in arrogance, believing his rule unchallenged. Aken-Ra's will burned like a sun of death, his hatred a tidal wave that crushed all beneath it. Nehekhara will fall, their king will bow before me, or his bones will serve within my legions. Sikhet felt the surge of necromantic energy pulsing through her form, compelling her. She should have felt nothing. And yet, somewhere deep within, beneath the iron grip of undeath, she felt dread. As the undead legions of Zan Sutek stirred once more, as the war drums echoed across the ruined sands, Sikhet knew that the chains around her soul had tightened. She was bound. But in the darkest corners of her hollow mind, a single thought remained. What if the chains could be broken? Chapter 4. War in the Land of the Dead. The dead did not march as men marched. They moved with unwavering precision, rank upon rank of skeletal warriors, their golden armor dulled by centuries but gleaming still under the pale light of the Nehekharan moons. The banners of Zan Sutek, emblazoned with the sigil of Aken-Ra, fluttered in the desert wind, carried not by mortal hands but by wraiths, tattered, ethereal forms bound to their eternal duty. Chariots rumbled across the dunes, their wheels leaving no lasting mark upon the sands, for this was the land of the dead, and here even the very earth obeyed different laws. The great necro-sphinxes, colossal constructs of leonine power, stalked alongside the legions, their glowing emerald eyes betraying no thought, no will of their own, only the command of their king. At the head of this deathless host, Sikhet rode atop her gilded war chariot, her skeletal fingers curled around the crook of command. The cold blue light that burned within her sockets surveyed the battlefield ahead. The city of Nehekhara, its walls adorned with jackal-headed idols, its defenders no different from her own. The dead, the forgotten, the enslaved. This was no war of mortals, no struggle of flesh against flesh. It was the eternal war of kings, a contest for dominance over a land already lost to time. And yet, despite herself, despite the weight of her chains, she felt it. Pride? The legions of Zan Sutek were hers to command. She had raised them from the dust, had whispered the words of returning, had bound their bones together with magic older than civilization itself. When she moved, they moved. When she willed them to kill, they obeyed without hesitation. There was power in this, and there was horror in how little choice she had in wielding it. The battle of the silent kings. The first wave crashed against the city like a storm of bone and steel. The defenders of Nehekhara, skeleton warriors clad in lapis-encrusted armor, met them in unbroken ranks, their shields locked, their spears leveled. The impact sent shards of bone flying, the clash of ancient bronze ringing across the dunes. Sikhet watched from above as the battle unfolded like a ritual, as orderly and calculated as the rites she had once performed in the temples of the Mortuary Cult. There was no screaming, no cries of pain, only the sound of blades cutting into brittle remains, the shattering of ribs, the breaking of skulls. A unit of Nehekhara's chariots thundered forth from the gates, their skeletal riders wielding long war spears, their chariots drawn by undead horses whose rotted flesh had long since fallen away. Sikhet raised a single hand. From the sand spires of bone erupted, impaling both riders and steeds, sending their broken bodies hurtling through the air. The spell required no thought, no effort. It was as natural as breathing had once been. But the battle was not yet won. Through the shifting dust and the clash of the dead, she sensed something wrong, a presence that should not be. The rogue Hierophant. At the heart of Nehekhara's defenses, upon the grand obsidian dais where the tomb kings of old had once sat in judgment, a solitary figure stood, his form wreathed in green flame. Sikhet narrowed her gaze. He was not like the others. The warriors of Nehekhara fought with the mindless obedience of all undead. They did not question, they did not think, they simply served. But this one commanded himself. A hierophant, a priest of the Mortuary Cult, like herself, but not bound, not shackled to a king. As if sensing her realization, the figure turned his gaze toward her. And then, with no voice, no lips to speak, he whispered directly into her mind. Freedom is possible, but you must be willing to break your chains. Sikhet's entire being recoiled. Such thoughts were heresy. And yet she had dreamed of warmth. She had dreamed of golden sands. She had dreamed of life. And now this creature, this undead abomination, spoke of freedom. "Who are you?" she demanded, her words not spoken but sent through the ether, across the battlefield where only the dead could hear. The Hierophant stepped forward, raising one skeletal hand. The air around him rippled, and the warriors of Nehekhara, who should have fought and died for their king, stopped. They turned, and instead of fighting for their master, they bowed before him. "I am one who chose," the Hierophant said, his voice a whisper older than the stones beneath them. "One who severed the ties that bound me." Sikhet's grip on the crook of command tightened. "That is impossible. Only if you believe it so." For the first time in centuries, Sikhet felt something that should not have been possible. Doubt, but she had no time to dwell on it. Because at that moment, deep within the heart of his great tomb, Aken-Ra awoke fully. And his rage filled her mind like an iron spear through her skull. Destroy him. The command was absolute. It was not a request. Sikhet tried to resist, but the chains tightened. The will of Aken-Ra crushed all else, wrapping around her mind like a vice, suffocating every thought, every doubt, every whisper of freedom. Her arm raised against her will. Her fingers moved without choice. A surge of black fire erupted from her palm, a spell of annihilation aimed directly at the rogue Hierophant. He did not flinch. As the spell came hurtling toward him, he did not raise a shield, did not summon a counter-curse. He only whispered two final words. "Remember this." Then the fire consumed him, and he was gone. The aftermath. Nehekhara fell. Its walls were shattered, its king desecrated, its armies ground to dust, beneath the relentless march of Zansutek's legions. Yet as Sikhet stood amidst the ruin, watching the broken bodies of the dead crumble to nothing, she felt no victory. She felt no pride, only the lingering echo of a voice that should not have existed. Freedom is possible, but you must be willing to break your chains. For the first time in her existence, Sikhet wondered, had she truly won this war, or had she simply tightened her own chains? Chapter 5. The Forbidden Text. The libraries of the dead whispered without tongues, their knowledge buried beneath dust and time. Beneath the ruins of Zan-Hudik, beneath its temples of worship, its crumbling monuments, and its sacrificial altars, lay a place that had not been disturbed for centuries, a place where even the dead feared to tread. Sikhet stood at the entrance to the catacombs of the first priests, the air thick with the weight of ancient sorcery. Here, the walls were carved with forbidden scriptures, detailing rites that even the Mortuary Cult had sought to erase. This was where the first Leech priests had studied the secrets of undeath, before the kings had bound them to their will, before servitude had been made eternal. She should not be here. Even now she felt the weight of Akenrad's mind, always pressing at the edge of her thoughts, an iron grip that never loosened. If he suspected? No, she could not allow that. With slow, careful movements, she raised her hand, her skeletal fingers tracing the glyphs on the ancient stone doors. They had not been opened since the time of the First Awakening, when the Tomb Kings had risen for the first time. She whispered an incantation, and the doors shuddered. A gust of stale air thick with the scent of mummified decay rolled out. The torches within flickered to life, their flames not golden, but a sickly green, the color of sorcery untouched by the gods. With a final glance behind her, she stepped inside. The search for liberation. The stone shelves stretched far beyond sight, lined with scrolls wrapped in rotting linen, tomes bound in cracked human leather, tablets engraved with the ancient laws of Nehekhara. Most of it was useless. She had studied these texts before, in her mortal life, doctrines on the binding of the soul, the rites of embalming, the power of oaths sworn in blood. She did not seek these. She sought the heresy. Sikhet moved deeper into the catacombs, her feet silent against the stone. The air hummed with forgotten power, the presence of something old, something that had been waiting. Her fingers trailed over a rusted chain bolted into the walls, restraints, meant to hold something once living or something that refused to die. At last she found it, a single blackened scroll, sealed in a reliquary of bone, locked by a clasp engraved with an unknown sigil. Not the sigil of the Mortuary Cult. Something older, something forbidden. Her breath, though long since unnecessary, hitched as she pried open the reliquary. The moment the seal was broken, the torches flared violently, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. She unrolled the scroll with careful precision, her fingers trembling, not from weakness, but from something else. Expectation. The Black Lotus of Harak. The text was not written in the language of the kings. It was older. The glyphs were etched with blood, the ink still dark, still fresh, as if time had never touched it. She read, and she understood. The Black Lotus of Harak, a relic that did not grant life, nor true undeath, but something in between. It was not bound to the kings, nor to the Mortuary Cult, nor to the laws of Nehekhara. Those who consumed its petals were free, not held by the chains of loyalty, not bound to serve in undeath. Free. The word echoed in her hollow mind. For centuries, she had never questioned the nature of her servitude. It had been an eternal truth, something that simply was. But now she had a name for what had been stolen from her. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the scroll. If the Black Lotus was real, if it still existed, then there was a way to sever the chains, a way to break the will of the Tomb Kings, a way to... The air shuddered. A presence descended upon her, slow, creeping, inevitable. The chains around her mind tightened, and a voice, deep as the graves of 1,000 kings, spoke within her skull. "What are you doing, Sikhet?" The suspicion of a god-king. Her grip on the scroll tightened, but she did not move. The air around her was thick with the force of Aken-Ra's will, his attention now fully upon her. The great necromantic mind that had ruled Zanzutek for millennia bore down upon her, his presence pressing into every corner of her consciousness, demanding obedience, demanding submission. "Why have you come here?" She had prepared for this. She had hidden her intent deep beneath layers of mental discipline, buried beneath centuries of service. Even now she wove a lie. "My king," she intoned, her voice steady, "I seek greater power for you." There was silence. And then amusement. A cold, dead chuckle, felt rather than heard. "Good. You are my most devoted servant, Sikhet. I expected nothing less." The pressure lifted, but not entirely. A warning, a reminder. Her loyalty was not in question yet. The next time she faltered, he would know, and there would be no escape. The path to Harach. The moment his presence faded, Sikhet collapsed against the stone shelves, her breath ragged, though she had no lungs to fill. She had come so close to discovery, but it did not matter. The knowledge was hers now. The Black Lotus was real. It was hidden in the ruins of Harach, a lost city swallowed by the sands, centuries before the first Tomb Kings rose from their graves. No mortal could find it. No loyal servant of the kings could ever seek it. But Sikhet was no longer loyal. Not in her mind. Not in her heart, if she still had one. As she sealed the scroll back within its reliquary, she whispered a single oath. "I will find it, and if it was truly the key to her freedom, then even Aken-Ra himself would not stand in her way." Chapter 6. Whispers in the Dust. The dead were not meant to dream. And yet, Sikhet dreamed again. A warning from beyond. She stood upon blackened sands, stretching into eternity beneath a sky that boiled with darkness. Above her, the sun was wrong, a withered thing, shriveled and black-veined, casting no warmth, no life, only a pale, sickly light that leached the world of color. In the distance, something loomed. A city, but not a city. A ruin, but not dead. Its twisted obelisks reached skyward like clawing hands. Its temple stood cracked and crumbling. Yet within its depths, something moved. Something awake. A voice whispered from the void. "You seek what should not be found." Sikhet turned. She faced herself. But it was not her. The figure before her was a husk, a corpse twisted beyond recognition, its face half devoured by decay, its hollow sockets burning with something deeper than undeath. Chains of black iron bound this version of her, not wrapped around the body but through it, piercing ribs, threading through the spine, wrapped tight around the very essence of what she was. "You will break your chains," the withered spectre whispered, "but not in the way you dream." Sikhet tried to speak. No words came. The spectre raised a skeletal hand, and the sands beneath them shook. The ruins in the distance trembled, and from their depths something rose. A presence, vast and wrong, something that should have remained buried. It had no form, only a shadow stretching across the sky, its edges writhing, its mass growing, expanding, swallowing everything. And then the whisper came again. "Turn back." The world collapsed into darkness. Waking in the tomb. Sikhet's eye sockets flared with cold fire as she awoke, her skeletal form snapping rigid upon the stone slab where she rested. The vision's presence still clung to her, not just a dream, but something more, something that left an imprint, a weight upon her mind. The ruins in the dream, was it Harach? Had she seen what was buried beneath it? Was it a warning, or was it a threat? She pushed the thought aside and rose, her tattered robes flowing behind her as she moved through the great temple of Sikhet. She had no time for doubt. The Black Lotus was real, and she would find it. The search begins. Sikhet had long memorized the sacred maps of Nehekhara, those that still remained untouched by time. Harak had been a great city in the age before the Tomb Kings, before the Mortuary Cult had perfected the rituals of eternal life. Its rulers had sought power beyond death, but unlike the kings of Khemri, they had not been bound by servitude. They had been free, and they had been buried for it. She spent days, weeks, poring through forgotten texts, deciphering fragments of shattered tablets, scanning through the ruined archives of Sikhet. Each night the dreams returned. Each night she saw the ruins tremble, the chains rattle, the thing in the shadows awaken. And yet, she pressed on. The truth was too close to abandon now. But she was not alone in her search. Necropolis watches. The first sign that she was being watched came in the form of silence. The tomb priests of Sikhet did not chatter as the living once had, but there was a rhythm to their movements, a pattern to their work, an unspoken language of servitude. And something in that pattern had changed. She felt it when she walked the halls, when the torches dimmed in her presence, when the lesser priests stood motionless as she passed, their eyeless skulls following her movements. The whispers had shifted. And then she saw him. Necropolis, a high-ranking Lich priest, his form more ancient than most, his skull was cracked, the bones worn smooth by time, his tattered robe still marked with the sigils of a kingdom long since buried. And his gaze never left her. She had underestimated him. She had thought him a relic, a servant of undeath, with no will of his own. But he was watching, and he was waiting. Sakir did not confront him. To do so would be foolish. To reveal her suspicions would only confirm that she had something to hide. Instead, she continued her search, but more carefully now. Every word she read, every tome she opened, she masked her intentions, making it seem as though she still served the will of Ak and Ra. But the truth was clear. Necropolis suspected her. And if he uncovered the truth, if he realized what she sought, then he would destroy her before she could ever claim her freedom. And if she failed, if she did not reach the Black Lotus first, then she would be chained to Ak and Ra. No, that could not be. She would find it. She must, even if the whispers in the dust spoke only of doom. Chapter 7. The Living Intruders. The silence of Sikhet was the silence of the dead, absolute, unbroken, eternal. The city had not heard the voices of the living in centuries. Not since the last grains of mortal flesh had rotted from the bones of its people. Not since the final breath of its priests had been swallowed by the sands. And yet, tonight, there was an intrusion. The wind carried foreign voices, whispered in strange tongues. The scent of living sweat, of warm flesh, of pulsing, beating hearts, tainted the stagnant air. Tomb robbers. Sikhet stood upon the balcony of the great temple, overlooking the desolate ruins. Below her, beyond the crumbling pillars, she saw them moving through the dust and rubble, shadows under the moon, figures clad in leather and steel, their hands gripping blades and torches, their eyes scanning the darkness for threats they could not comprehend. Fools! Did they believe that death slept here? Did they think Sikhet had truly fallen into ruin? She knew the type. Grave thieves. Jackals of the living world come to strip sacred tombs of their relics, to pry gold from the grasp of the dead, to steal what did not belong to them. And yet, the longer she watched, the deeper a strange feeling coiled in the hollow pit where her heart had once been. It was not hatred nor wrath. It was envy, or they breathed. for they spoke of places beyond this land, of cities untouched by undeath, where the dead did not command, did not rule, did not march in legions beneath the will of a master. A world without chains. The order to kill. Destroy them. The command crashed through her mind like a thunderclap. Aknara's voice. His will. It was not a request. Sikhet's fingers tightened around the crook of command, the necromantic power within it flaring to life. She had obeyed such commands before, 1,000 times over. Mortals who trespassed upon sacred grounds did not leave. Their bodies were reduced to dust, their souls bound to eternal servitude, their blood drained as offering to the king of Zan-Sutek. This should have been no different. And yet, the wind carried a voice, clear, strong, defiant. We take what we can and leave before dawn. If we stay, we all die. She turned her gaze to the leader of the living, a man of Araby, wrapped in desert leathers, his face hidden behind a veil of black cloth. His stance was careful, measured, a warrior's stance, but his eyes, dark, watchful, sharp as a blade, betrayed intelligence beyond simple greed. The others called him Captain Idris, and when Sikhet reached out to his soul, to the flickering ember of life within him, she felt something she had not felt in centuries. He was not afraid. Not of her, not of the city, and somehow, impossibly, he noticed her watching. His gaze lifted toward the temple balcony, locking directly onto her. Sikhet froze. It was impossible. No mortal should have been able to perceive her presence, hidden as she was within the ethereal veil of undeath. Yet he saw her, and for the briefest moment so did the others. A cry of alarm, blades drawn. Sikhet did not hesitate. With a single gesture, the dead stirred. The massacre begins. The sands shook, a pulse of necromantic power surging through the ruined city. The tomb robbers turned as shadows slithered from the ruins, half-buried skeletons clawing their way to the surface, their jaws hanging open in a silent, eternal scream. Golden armored warriors rose from the dust, their ancient weapons gleaming under the moon, their eyes flaring with spectral fire. A dozen thieves died in seconds. One was impaled through the gut by a rusted spear, his scream turning into a gurgling choke as the weapon twisted. Another was dragged down by skeletal hands, his body ripped apart, limb by limb, his blood staining the forgotten stones of Zan-Sutek. Still another tried to run but was caught by the throat, lifted high by a towering Ushabti, the stone war golem crushing his bones to powder before casting his ruined corpse aside. And yet Captain Idris did not flee. He fought. His scimitar flashed in the darkness, cleaving through ancient ribs, severing bony hands as they reached for him. The others fell. But he stood. Sikhet watched him. And then, against all reason, she stepped forward. The moment of choice. He saw her. Truly saw her. Unlike the other dead, she did not lurch forward with mindless hunger, nor did she swing a weapon in blind obedience to her king. She watched. She hesitated. And he noticed. "You're not like them," Idris said, his voice steady despite the carnage around him. "Are you?" Sikhet did not answer. Her grip on the crook of command faltered. She had the power to crush him, to tear the breath from his lungs, to bind his soul to undeath. And yet, for reasons she could not explain, she did not. He took a slow step forward, blood dripping from his blade. "You don't have to do this." A pause. A whisper of thought slipped through the chains of her mind, unbidden, unwanted. What if he's right? The command from Akhenar still rang through her skull, an iron grip around her very being. Destroy them. And yet, she did not obey. Instead, she made her choice. She lifted her arm, not to strike, but to open a path. The sands shifted and the skeletal warriors paused. A corridor through the ruins, leading away from Zan-Utech, opened before Idris and what few survivors remained. His eyes narrowed. "You're letting us go," he said, more a statement than a question. Sikhet said nothing. There was no need. For the first time since her death, she had defied her king's will. For the first time in centuries, she had acted of her own accord. And as she watched the living flee into the desert night, she knew there would be no going back. Chapter 8. The Wrath of Aken-Ra. The dead did not feel fear, or so Sikhet had once believed. Yet as she stood before the great sarcophagus of Aken-Ra, deep within the heart of Zan-Sutech's royal necropolis, she felt something that had been absent for centuries, a gnawing, festering sense of impending doom. The king knew. The gathering storm. The air in the burial chamber was heavy with sorcery, thick with the whispers of the entombed, their voices echoing through the walls like faint, brittle echoes of the past. Torches burned with green-blue flames, casting flickering shadows over the carved hieroglyphs that told the story of Aken-Ra's rule, both in life and undeath. And in the center of it all lay his resting place. The sarcophagus was massive, carved from obsidian and gold, its surface etched with necromantic seals that pulsed with cold power. It was not just a tomb, it was a prison, holding within it the undying will of the god-king of Zan-Sutech. Sikhet knelt before it, her skeletal fingers clutching the crook of command, her robes flowing around her in the still, stagnant air. She did not dare look up. Not yet. "You disobeyed me." The voice wasn't spoken. It wasn't heard. It was felt, a force hammering into her soul, wrapping around her mind like the cold grip of a burial shroud, dragging her down into the abyss of her own submission. "You were ordered to destroy the living." Images flashed through her mind. The battle in the ruins. The tomb robbers, their bodies torn apart by the warriors of Zan-Sutech. The blood soaking the sand. And then Captain Idris, his eyes meeting hers. The moment she had let him go. Haknier saw it all. The weight of the question crushed down on her. There was no lie that would deceive a king who had ruled in undeath for over 1,000 years. He was testing her. "I did not believe they were a threat, my king," she said at last, her voice a whisper through eternity. "Their presence was fleeting, not worth the power it would take to hunt them across the sands." Silence. "Then, pain." Sikhet gasped, though she had no lungs to draw breath. It felt as if her very bones were breaking, as if something crushed her from within. The chains of servitude that bound her to her king tightened, pulling, pulling, pulling. "You are not to question my will, Sikhet." A pause. Then, as swiftly as it had come, the pain ceased. Her form collapsed, her body sinking to the cold floor, her mind reeling from the punishment. But she was still intact, which meant he had not yet decided to destroy her, which meant she still had time. The revelation of Harach. The king's presence withdrew slightly, leaving only a whisper of command. "I have a new task for you." Sikhet's gaze lifted. "There is an artifact buried in the ruins of Harahok. It has been lost for centuries." A cold sensation crawled up her spine. The Black Lotus? He knew of it. But did he know why she sought it? "You will lead an expedition there. You will recover it. And you will return it to me." She bowed low, hiding the turmoil boiling within her hollow chest. "It shall be done, my king." Yet even as she spoke the words, another thought coiled within her, treacherous and insidious. If I reach it first, if I claim it for myself, then maybe, just maybe, the chains would finally break. The eyes of the dead. Sikhet left the necropolis, her mind racing. She needed to move fast. There was no doubt Mekhotep would be watching. If the king suspected her, then the other leech priests would as well. The moment she showed weakness, the moment she made one misstep, they would strike, and she would be nothing but a pile of dust and broken bones before she ever reached Hera. She made her way through the temple corridors, her skeletal feet moving with unnatural grace, her robes whispering along the sandstone floors. The torches burned low as she passed, their flames dimming in her presence. Then, a shift in the air. She was not alone. She turned sharply and found Mechotep standing in the corridor, waiting for her. The old Liches priest tilted his head, his hollow sockets gleaming with cold amusement. "I wonder," he murmured, voice dry as ancient parchment, "if our king still finds you as useful as he once did." Sikhet did not respond. She did not need to. This was a warning. He knew she had lied to the king. He suspected her true intentions. But for now, he would say nothing, because he was waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to fall. Sikhet tightened her grip on her staff, the cold fury of undeath coiling within her. She would not fall. She would find the Black Lotus, and she would not return it to Aken-Ra, no matter what horrors awaited her in Harak. Because if she failed, then she would never be free. Chapter 9. A Pact with the Living. The dead did not bargain. They commanded, they took, they enslaved. And yet here she was, a leech priestess of Zan-Sutek, preparing to do what no servant of Akenar had ever done. She was about to make a deal with the living. The dead walked the desert. The night stretched endlessly over the dunes, the moon a pale, watching eye casting silver light over the endless ocean of sand. Zan-Sutek was far behind her, its ancient ruins fading into the distance, swallowed by the vastness of the Nehekhara wastes. For the first time in centuries, Sikhet walked beyond the domain of her king. The chains that bound her had not weakened, but she felt a difference, like a slave who, for a brief moment, had stepped beyond the walls of their prison. Yet freedom was still an illusion. The king's will was never truly absent. She could still feel it pulling at her mind, a whisper in the dark, a force that could drag her back in an instant should he demand it. She had little time, and if she was to reach Harak before her king's patience waned, she would need guides. She would need the living. Finding the survivors, tracking a group of mortals across the wastes of Nehekhara was not difficult. They left behind footprints in the sand, traces of their campfires, the scent of sweat and blood lingering in the air, things no undead would ever leave. Sikhet moved without sound, gliding like a wraith through the dunes, until at last she found them. A camp of survivors, what remained of the tomb robbers who had fled Zan-Sutek. They had made their refuge in the shadow of a ruined obelisk, its ancient hieroglyphs long worn smooth by time. Their fire burned low, their forms hunched, weary, wounded. They had lost many. Sikhet had seen them slaughtered by her master's forces. And yet here they still stood. Among them, the one called Captain Idris remained unbroken. His blade rested at his side, his eyes sharp despite exhaustion. Sikhet did not approach as a foe. She did not emerge from the darkness as a hunter. Instead, she stood at the edge of the firelight, watching, waiting. And when Idris finally noticed her, his hand moved toward his weapon, but he did not draw it. "I knew you would come." His voice was calm, measured. The others stirred in fear, reaching for knives, bows, and charms against the dead. But Idris raised a hand, stopping them. Sikhet took one step forward, her skeletal form glinting in the fire's glow. And then she spoke words that had never before been uttered by a servant of the dead. "I offer you a bargain. The bargain with the living." The silence was thick, stretched between two worlds, between the living and the dead, between fear and opportunity. The tomb robbers did not trust her. They had seen what she was capable of. They had seen her raise the dead, command the legions, summon horrors from the earth itself. And yet here she stood, making an offer instead of a demand. Idris was the first to break the silence. "You let us go?" His voice carried both accusation and curiosity. Sikhet did not deny it. "I need to reach Harach." One of the thieves, a woman with a scarred cheek and nervous hands, scoffed. "What does a dead thing need with a lost city?" Sikhet turned her empty gaze toward her, and the woman flinched, instinctively recoiling. "That does not concern you? Then why in the abyss should we help you?" Another snapped, gripping his dagger. "Your kind only bring death and curses." Sikhet slowly lifted a skeletal hand, and with it the flames of their campfire flickered unnaturally, twisting into unnatural shapes, serpents, warriors, beasts of legend, formed from living fire. "I know the paths through the desert that no living man knows," she said. "I can lead you past the ruins, away from the cursed lands where the dead still hunt. I can guide you to treasures that have not been touched since the days of the first kings." A pause. Then she lowered her hand, and the fire returned to normal. "But only if you take me to Harach." A reluctant agreement. The robbers argued among themselves, debating between greed and survival, between fear and opportunity. But in the end, it was Idris who made the final decision. "You want something buried in that city," he said, studying her. "Something your kind is not supposed to have." Sikhet said nothing, but her silence was enough of an answer. Idris exhaled slowly. "Fine." The others turned to him in shock. "Are you mad?" one of them hissed. "You want us to lead a leech priest to Harach? Do you know what's buried there?" Idris turned to Sikhet, his eyes dark with unreadable intent. "She does." Another long silence. Then, reluctantly, he extended his hand. A gesture of agreement. Sikhet looked at it for a long moment. Then, for the first time in over 1,000 years, she grasped the hand of a living man. A pact had been made, and there would be no turning back. The journey begins. As dawn crested over the dunes, Sikhet set out with the living, leaving behind the ruins of Zan-Utechek for the first time in centuries. Every step she took away from her master's city, she expected to feel his wrath, to hear his voice shatter through her mind, dragging her back into the abyss of servitude. But the desert was silent, and though the chains still bound her, though they still weighed upon her soul, she could almost imagine that they were weaker than before, that she was one step closer to breaking them, to freedom. Chapter 10. The Trial of Bone and Sand. The desert was not dead. It breathed, shifting with the weight of time, swallowing empires, shaping kingdoms, grinding all things into dust. For centuries, Sikhet had watched it from the ruins of Zan-Sutek, never crossing its endless sands. Now she walked it once more, her skeletal form wrapped in the tattered remnants of her priestly robes, her footsteps leaving no mark upon the shifting dunes. And for the first time in 1,000 years, she was being hunted, pursued by the dead. The forces of Nehekhara were relentless. The first sign of them had been shadows upon the dunes, unnatural figures moving through the moonlit sands without breath, without hesitation. At night, their presence was a cold pulse in the ether, a necromantic weight that pressed against Sikhet's awareness, whispering of deathless pursuers. They were not mindless warriors, but Liche priests like herself, servants of Akenria, bound by the same unholy laws. And they had been sent to drag her back. Sikhet did not tell the living of their presence. Not at first. What use would it be? They could not fight the dead, not as she could. The best they could do was run. And so they did. A flicker of something else. As they traveled, Sikhet felt different. It was not life. She would never be alive again. But something was changing. She had always known what she was, a servant, a tool, a conduit of the king's will. But now, with every step she took away from Zan Sutek, that certainty wavered. The chains were still there, but they did not feel as absolute. She could hear her own thoughts, not just the echoes of her king's commands. She did not simply act, she chose. And for the first time in centuries, Sikhet wondered who she was beneath the veil of undeath. Then a voice broke her thoughts. "We are not alone." It was Idris, his voice low, sharp. His hand hovered over his scimitar, his body poised for conflict. Sikhet's empty sockets turned toward the dunes. She had sensed it too. Not the dead, but something else. Something alive. The nomads of the sands. Figures emerged from the dunes, moving with trained silence. They were tall, lean warriors, their bodies wrapped in sand-colored robes, their heads veiled against the desert wind. Their eyes, dark, watchful, wary, glinted beneath the hoods of their coverings, hands resting upon curved blades and bows carved from bone. Nehekhara nomads. Not tomb robbers. Not warriors of undeath. Survivors. For centuries, after the rise of the Tomb Kings, small clans of living Nehekharans had fled into the wastes, refusing the rule of their deathless kings. They were a people of orphaned gods, forgotten traditions, barely more than legend. And yet, here they were. The leader stepped forward, a woman, fierce and unyielding, a long curved dagger strapped to her belt, her arms adorned with scarred tattoos of old Nehekharan script. Her gaze landed on Sikhet, and she stopped. "I know you." Sikhet stiffened. That was impossible. She had not been a woman of flesh for centuries. She was a memory, a ghost, a thing of dust and echoes. And yet, as the woman stepped closer, her brows furrowed, her voice laced with the weight of something half-remembered, she spoke a name that had not been uttered since Sikhet had drawn breath. Astikitka, not Sikhet the Lich priestess, not Sikhet the servant of Akendra, but Sikhetka, her mortal name, the name she had buried beneath the rites of undeath, beneath servitude, beneath chains that had bound her for centuries. Something lurched within her. Not pain, not weakness, but a memory. A glimpse of something buried beneath the weight of eternity. "You should not know that name," she whispered, though her voice was no longer truly her own. The woman's expression hardened. "My grandmother told me the story," she said, "of a priestess who chose to serve the dead, a woman who drank from the cup of eternity and was never seen again." Her hand tightened around her dagger. "I did not think it was true." The other nomads muttered among themselves, uneasy. They did not trust her. Neither did the tomb robbers. Sikhet could feel their fear. She was something they had only ever heard of in myth, a leech priest that still walked, a dead thing that had once been a woman, like them, the shadow of pursuit. Then the air shifted. Sikhet's sockets snapped toward the dunes. The cold pulse of necromantic power, familiar, suffocating. Mukhotep's forces had found them. They came not in legions, not in open war, but as shadows in the dark, as whispers on the wind, moving unseen across the dunes. But Sikhet felt them. She always would. "They're coming," she said. Idris tensed, glancing at the nomads. "You know these sands better than we do. If we run, where do we go?" The leader hesitated. Then her eyes darkened. "There is an oasis, the Valley of the Forgotten." A bitter laugh. Sikhet's gaze lingered on her. A name, her name, had been spoken. A piece of her past had been remembered. But there was no time to think of that now. Now they ran. Through the cold sands, through the whispers of the dead, through the veil of pursuit and prophecy. Sikhet did not know if she was closer to freedom, or if she was running straight into the abyss. Chapter 11. Descent into the sunken necropolis. The sands whispered of Harak, but they never spoke its name aloud. The lost city had been buried long before the first tomb kings had risen, long before the mortuary cult had perfected the rites of eternal servitude. It was a place of forgotten gods and forsaken souls, a graven wound in the desert where even the wind dared not linger. And now Sikhet had come to claim its black heart, the city that should not be. Harak did not rise like the other ruins of Nehekhara. It had sunk, its once great temples and towering obelisks swallowed by the earth, leaving behind only a jagged maw in the sand. From above, it looked like a gaping wound, a pit of darkness where the bones of the past still lingered beneath the surface. Sikhet stood at its edge, staring down into the void, her skeletal fingers tightening around her staff. They had come so far. Idris and the tomb robbers stood behind her, uneasy, their eyes scanning the shadows below. The Nehekhara nomads, including the woman who had recognized Sikhet's mortal name, would go no further. "This place is damned," the woman said. "If you enter, you may never leave." Sikhet did not answer. She had already accepted that she may never leave. But she would not turn back. Not now. The forsaken dead. The descent into Harak was steep, the path carved into the stone by hands long turned to dust. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. It was unnatural, a cold that had nothing to do with wind or shadow, a cold that seeped into bone, curling through the remnants of Sikhet's ancient flesh. The others felt it too. Idris pulled his cloak tighter around himself, the other thieves muttering curses under their breath. Then the first whispers began. They did not come from above, nor from the wind. They came from the stone itself, a murmuring chorus of souls long forgotten, trapped in the black depths of the city that had been swallowed by the sands. Then the dead moved, the wraiths of Harak. From the ruined archways and shattered doorways, shadows uncoiled, not skeletons, not mummies, but wraiths, their forms half solid, shifting like smoke in the dying torchlight. They had no eyes, no flesh, only the hollow remnants of what they had once been. Not bound by a king, not enslaved by the mortuary cult. They were something else entirely, and they were hungry. One of the tomb robbers let out a strangled cry as a wraith descended upon him, its talons sinking into his chest. He screamed, a sound of pure, raw agony, his body rotting before their eyes, his flesh withering, his skin turning gray and cracked, his life devoured in seconds. He collapsed, a mummified husk, his soul torn from his body, his eyes still frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Then the wraiths turned on the others. The battle in the dark. The tomb robbers fought like dying men, because they were. Idris's blade flashed, slicing through the shifting forms of the wraiths, but his strikes had no effect. His steel passed through them like mist, doing nothing to halt their advance. One of the thieves fell, his throat torn open, his lifeblood draining into the dust. Another was lifted off his feet, his body shriveled into nothingness before he could even scream. They were losing. Zitte raised her staff, the air around her crackling with necromantic power, and she commanded, "Obey." The force of her voice shattered the air, a wave of ancient magic crashing outward, searing the wraiths like fire to parchment. They screeched, twisting in agony, recoiling from her power. They could not touch her, for she was undead, but not forsaken. Not yet. The guardian of the Black Lotus. At last they reached the inner sanctum, the heart of the sunken necropolis. It was a vast circular chamber, its walls covered in hieroglyphs that had no meaning, symbols of a time before the tomb kings, before the gods of Nehekhara had been named. At its center, Upon a pedestal of black stone rested the Black Lotus. It was not a flower. It was something else, something ancient, something wrong. A bloom of deep violet, its petals edged with unnatural gold, pulsing with an energy that Sikhet had never felt before. And it was not unguarded. From the darkened alcove behind it, a presence moved. A figure, wrapped in the shadows of the forgotten, its form withered but strong, its golden mask in the shape of a jackal's skull, its hands clawed, its robes shifting as if woven from the essence of the abyss itself. The guardian of the Black Lotus. It was no king, no priest, no pharaoh. It was a god, a forgotten god of death, long erased from the texts of Nehekhara, buried beneath sand and time and silence. And now it turned its empty gaze upon Sikhet. It spoke, though its mouth did not move. You have come to claim that which was never meant to be touched. The weight of its presence pressed down on her, heavier than anything she had ever felt, even heavier than Aken-Ra himself. Sikhet's hands tightened around her staff. She had not come this far to turn back now. The Black Lotus was within her grasp, but now she had to take it from a god. Chapter 12. The Price of Freedom. The forgotten god of death loomed before her, its form a mass of shifting shadows wrapped in tattered robes of midnight silk. Its jackal's skull mask gleamed in the torchlight, its golden edges worn smooth by time. The Black Lotus pulsed upon the pedestal, its petals shimmering with unnatural energy, a bloom of deep violet, edged with a gold that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. And Sikhet knew this was it. This was the moment that would either unbind her soul or destroy her utterly. The choice. You have come far, priestess. The entity's voice was not a sound, it was a weight pressing into her mind, reverberating through the hollow of her undead bones. It was not a whisper, not a command, but something in between. You seek the Black Lotus? Sikhet lifted her chin. I do. The forgotten god tilted its head, the golden mask catching the flickering torchlight. You know what it does. She nodded. It grants undeath without servitude. A long silence. Then a hollow chuckle, something older than kings, older than gods. That is what you believe. Sikhet stiffened. What do you mean? The god lifted one clawed hand, gesturing toward the lotus. It does not free. It transforms. Sikhet hesitated. Drink, and you will no longer be bound to your king. The chains of servitude will shatter. But what remains, the god's voice was ancient, knowing, amused, will not be what you were. Not priest, not queen, not human, not even leech. Her skeletal fingers tightened around her staff. The Black Lotus was her only hope, the only path to freedom. But what was freedom if it meant becoming something else entirely? A rustling behind her, a sudden cold pulse of necromantic energy. Then she cannot be allowed to choose. The arrival of Nehekhara. The great bronze doors of the inner sanctum burst open, and the air howled with sorcery. Nehekhara stepped into the chamber, his ancient robes billowing, his eye sockets burning with sickly green fire. Behind him his warriors followed, lich priests, deathless champions clad in gold and bone, the enforcers of Aken-Ra's will. He had found her. Mistake. Nehekhara's voice was calm, deliberate, but it carried a weight of finality. Did you think you could escape his will? Sikhet did not move from the pedestal. His will is not absolute. The laughter that followed was hollow, cold. You are nothing without him. You exist only because he allows it. Sikhet's sockets narrowed, a spark of defiance burning where her soul had once been. And yet, she said, I am here, and he is not. Nehekhara's amusement vanished. He raised one ancient hand, and the air cracked with necromantic power. "Then you will die again, Sikhet, and this time you will not return." Battle in the tomb of a god. The first bolt of death energy tore through the chamber, exploding against the pedestal where the Black Lotus rested. Sikhet barely dodged, hurling herself aside as the impact sent cracks spiraling across the stone. The forgotten god watched in silence, unmoving, as the battle began. Nekhotep's forces surged forward, tomb guards, skeletal warriors bound by chains of necromantic will, their blades flashing with cursed steel. Sikhet raised her staff, and the shadows of Harach obeyed. The forsaken wraiths shrieked as they descended, spectral claws raking through the armored dead, ripping souls from bodies, leaving only hollow husks collapsing into dust. Nekhotep moved with unnatural speed, dodging through the carnage, his staff glowing with black flame. He struck at Sikhet, and the impact sent her staggering. "You were once his greatest servant," Nekhotep hissed. "Now you are a traitor." Sikhet caught his next strike, their staffs clashing, sending shocks of sorcerous power cascading through the air. Her voice was calm. "Maybe I was always meant to be." Then she drove her knee into his chest, splitting ribs, sending him reeling back. But she had no time to finish him. The chamber was collapsing around them, the forces of the dead clashing with the forsaken wraiths of Harach, and the Black Lotus trembled upon its pedestal. It was time. The choice is made. Sikhet turned to the Black Lotus. Its petals pulsed. Waiting. Nekhotep saw. His eyes flared with fury. No. He lunged. Sikhet snatched the lotus from the pedestal. The moment her skeletal fingers touched it, a pulse of power shot through her, a force unlike any necromancy she had ever felt. The chamber shook. The forgotten god watched. Nekhotep's warriors collapsed, their bindings unraveling, their souls ripped from their bones as the energy of the Black Lotus surged through the tomb. Sikhet lifted the Black Lotus to where her lips had once been, and she drank. The petals melted into pure energy, coursing through her bones, her soul, her very existence. And she screamed. Rebirth in death. Her mind shattered. Her soul unraveled. She felt the chains of Akanria snap, 1,000 years of servitude shattered in an instant. And yet she felt something else take hold. Something new. Her form shifted. The glow in her eye sockets changed, from the cold fire of a lich priest to something deeper, darker, unknowable. She felt herself being rewritten, reforged into something beyond undeath, beyond mortality. The Black Lotus was no gift. It was a metamorphosis. She turned to Nekhotep, who stared at her with horror. "What are you?" he whispered. Sikhet did not answer. She lifted her hand, and Nekhotep screamed as the energy of the Black Lotus ripped through him, unmaking him, reducing him to nothing but dust. The tomb fell silent. The forgotten god watched, unjudging. "You are no longer a slave," it said, "but you are no longer what you were." Sikhet looked down at her hands. She was changed. The chains of Akanre were gone. But what she had become, that was something even she did not yet understand, and the world would learn soon enough. Chapter 13. The Shattering of Chains. Sikhet collapsed to her knees, the ruined chamber trembling around her, the air thick with sorcery that had no master, no scripture, no god. The echoes of Nekhotep's final scream still rattled through the stones, fading into nothingness as his body crumbled to dust. But she did not hear it. She could hear nothing but herself. For the first time in over 1,000 years, she was alone in her mind. Akan-Ra's voice was gone. His will, that relentless, crushing force that had bound her every action, every thought, Every breathless moment of her unlife had shattered. She was free. Yet as she reached within herself, she knew something was missing. She was no longer a leech priest. She was something else. The death of the leech priestess. The power of the Black Lotus still burned within her, threading through the hollows of her bones like smoke, pulsing with dark life. But it was not undeath, not as she had known it. Before, she had been a conduit for the will of her king, a vessel through which his power flowed. Her magic had been bound in laws, in rituals, in the sacred rites of the Mortuary Cult. But now, she reached for the familiar wellspring of necromantic energy, the one she had drawn from since the day she had drunk from the cup of eternity, and found nothing. She could no longer feel the bindings of the Mortuary Cult, nor the endless, ceaseless current of death magic that had once connected her to Zan Sutek. The sacred spells, the rituals of binding, the power that had raised thousands of corpses in Akenra's name, all of it was gone. The realization struck her like a blade. She had severed her chains, but in doing so she had also severed herself from everything she had once been. Something unnatural. A clawed hand lifted before her, trembling. Her fingers, once skeletal, had changed. Flesh had not returned, yet they were no longer simply bone. A black substance, like solidified shadow, wrapped around her fingers, moving, shifting. Neither smoke nor flesh nor chitin, but something in between. Something that should not exist. The golden tattoos of the Mortuary Cult, once etched into her skeletal form, had burned away, replaced by something older, something unnatural, something beyond even the gods of Nehekhara. The glow within her eye sockets had changed. No longer the cold blue flames of a leech priest, bound to the ancient laws of the dead. Now they burned with a deeper, richer fire, black and violet, shifting like embers in the wind, unnatural in their hunger. Sikhet clenched her new hands, and the shadows of the chamber responded, twisting, moving in ways they should not. She was not a leech anymore, but she was not alive either. She was something else entirely. The watching god. A presence still remained in the chamber. The forgotten god of Harach, the guardian of the Black Lotus, stood where it had been since the moment she arrived. It had not interfered. And now it watched her transformation with something close to amusement. You severed your chains. Its voice was a rumble beneath reality, ancient, untouched by time. You did not know the cost. Sikhet rose to her feet, her new form silent, moving with a grace that was no longer entirely human, nor entirely undead. She turned her gaze to the forgotten god, her voice steady. What am I? The god tilted its jackal skull mask, golden eyes glinting. That is for you to discover. A pause. Then a chuckle, low, rattling, as if something that had not laughed in centuries was remembering how. But know this, Sikhetka. The kings of Nehekhara will not understand you. The dead will not accept you. The living will fear you. Its burning gaze locked onto her new hands. The shifting darkness that had replaced her mortal form. You are no longer one of them, any of them. Sikhet stared down at herself, at what she had become. For the first time in 1,000 years, she felt something deep within her soul. It was not fear, not grief, not joy. It was the absence of certainty. For the first time since she had sacrificed her mortal life for undeath, she did not know her place in the world. She did not know where she belonged. The silence of the dead. The chamber was still, save for the whisper of the winds through the broken ruins. The tomb was collapsing, as if the power of the Black Lotus had unraveled the last remnants of its existence. Sikhet turned to the exit, toward the world beyond Harach. She was free. But what was freedom when you had no kingdom? No king? No purpose? For the first time, the path ahead was hers to decide. And that, she realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. Chapter 14. The Wrath of the Tomb Kings. The deserts of Nehekhara had long been ruled by the dead. Their kings did not slumber, nor did their wars ever truly end. They did not forget, and they did not forgive. Their empires, though shattered by time and ruin, still stood, upheld by the sheer will of those who had defied mortality itself. And now that will had turned its gaze upon her. Sikhet, once a Liche priestess of Sutek, once a servant of the Tomb Kings, once bound by chains of sorcery and loyalty, was now an abomination in their eyes. She had broken their laws. She had severed her chains. And for that, the Tomb Kings would march against her with all the wrath of the undying. The call of the deathless lords. From the depths of his obsidian tomb, Achen-Ra awoke in rage. The desert trembled as his will stretched forth, reaching across the distant ruins of Sutek, seeking the one who had betrayed him. But she was gone. The chains that had bound her had shattered. She was no longer his to command. And that, more than anything, was an insult beyond comprehension. His anger spread like wildfire, and soon it reached the other kings of Nehekhara. For Sikhet had not merely defied him, she had defied the entire order of undeath. If she could sever her chains, what else could be broken? And so the rulers of the dead rose from their tombs, their golden sarcophagi breaking open, their eyes burning with the flames of ancient vengeance. In the far reaches of the desert, in the ruins of Nehekhara, a war horn of bone sounded, signaling the march of an army long since turned to dust. In the lost city of Sekhem-Ra, the priests of another forgotten king chanted their sacred incantations, raising legions of mummified warriors, their bronze swords still gleaming after centuries in the grave. The Liche priests gathered, their whispers seething with indignation and fury. What Sikhet had done was impossible. And if one could defy the will of the kings, could others follow? That could not be allowed. There would be no heresy in undeath. And so, the armies of the dead began to march. Their only purpose, to erase Sikhet from existence. The first attack. She felt it before she saw it. The weight of an oncoming storm. The whisper of 1,000 voices chanting in unison. The scent of dust and rot and ancient vengeance carried upon the winds. Sikhet stood at the edge of an abandoned oasis, her gaze fixed upon the horizon. Idris and the remaining tomb robbers had set up a small encampment, unaware of the doom that approached. She had not told them yet. How could she? How could she explain that the very land of the dead was moving against her? That an army was coming to undo her existence? She had no kingdom, no city, no loyal warriors to command. She was one being standing against the empire of undeath itself. But she was not afraid. She could not be. Not anymore. And then they came. The sand shifted, dunes collapsing as an endless tide of skeletal warriors emerged from the depths of the earth. Bronze spears gleamed under the light of the dying sun, their banners whipping in the wind, the sigils of Achen-Ra, of Sekhen-Ra, of Nehekhara. Not one kingdom, many. They were not merely here to kill her. They were here to erase her from memory, to make sure no one ever knew she had existed at all. The battle begins. The first arrows struck the sand around her, their tips humming with necrotic energy, designed to tear apart the unholy. Sikhet raised her hand, and the shadows answered. Not the necromantic power of before, not the controlled, methodical magic of the Liche priests, the power of servitude and ritual. This was something else. It surged from her like a living thing, tendrils of black mist coiling around her, forming into blades, into shields, into weapons that did not belong to any mortal or undead king. And then the enemy charged. The first warriors of Aken-Ra reached her, their blades swinging, their shields locking in unison, but she moved faster. Her form twisted through the air, the darkness around her solidifying into talons, striking through golden armor like it was parchment, ripping through bone, through ribs, through the glowing embers in their skulls. She cut through them, but they were endless. More rose from the sand beneath her feet, their spears driving forward. She twisted, dodging, but one found its mark, striking deep into her side. Pain. Real pain. Not the dull awareness of injury that she had known as a Liche priest, but something sharper. Her new form was not invincible. She was not a god, but she was free, and she would not fall here. She reached out, her hand grasping at the air, and the shadows responded. A shockwave erupted from her, tearing through the advancing undead, sending them crashing into the sand, their bones splintering on impact. And still more came. She was one against thousands, and she did not care. Let them come. She would show them what true defiance looked like. The war had only just begun. She could not fight them forever. She could feel it, the pull of battle, the strain on her new form, the weight of her power burning through her. If she stayed, she would die again. This time, there would be no return. Sikhet. A voice cut through the chaos. Idris, his face wild with disbelief and fury, urging her toward the remaining survivors, toward escape. She did not want to flee. She wanted to burn them all to the ground. But she could not win here. Not yet. With a snarl of frustration, she turned and followed Idris into the dunes, disappearing into the darkness of the desert night. The war against her had begun, and next time, she would not run. Chapter 15. The Last Stand of Sikhet. The desert wind carried the scent of war and dust, the promise of violence whispered upon the shifting sands. Sikhet stood atop a rocky outcrop, overlooking the valley below where her unlikely forces gathered, the remnants of Idris's tomb robbers, the Nehekhara nomads who had chosen defiance over servitude, and the forsaken undead of Herak, those who had been forgotten by the gods and the kings alike. They were not an army. They were survivors, outcasts, abominations, and soon they would be erased from existence. She could feel the approaching tide of death, the armies of the tomb kings marching toward them, their will bent upon a single purpose, her destruction. She had fled once. She would not flee again. This would be her last stand. And if she fell, she would tear down the dead with her. A war on two fronts. The sky was darkening, the sun swallowed by ashen clouds, an omen of the war to come. Below, her forces prepared. Idris's survivors, scavengers turned warriors, fashioned barricades from fallen stone, sharpened their blades, and prepared for a fight they could not win. The nomads, wielding weapons older than any living civilization, whispered forgotten prayers to gods who had abandoned them. And the forsaken undead, those who had defied the will of the tomb kings, those whom the Mortuary Cult had forsaken, stood in eerie silence, waiting for their time to kill their own kind. Sikhet looked upon them all. She had once been a priestess of undeath, a conduit for the will of the kings. Now she stood against them, an exile, a traitor, something unnatural. And as she clenched her blackened fingers as the shadows swirled around her, she finally understood. She was not a leech. She was not mortal. She was something else entirely. Something that should not exist. And for the first time, she embraced it. The oncoming storm. The first sign of the enemy's arrival was the thunder of chariots, the rattle of bone against metal, the distant war cries of warriors who had not drawn breath in thousands of years. Then, upon the crest of the dunes they appeared. The armies of Aken-Ra, their banners emblazoned with the sigil of Zan Shutek, golden chariots drawn by undead horses, skeletal foot soldiers marching in perfect formation, their weapons glinting in the dying light. But it was not just Zan Sutek. This was an alliance of death, a coalition of forgotten kings, wrathful warlords, vengeful priests, all brought together by one common cause: to erase Sikhet from existence. She could feel Aktenira's presence, his rage a storm upon the horizon, his fury like a hammer upon her mind, though he could no longer command her. She was free of him, but that only made him more determined to destroy her. The first clash. The battle began not with a horn, nor with a charge, but with a scream. A dozen Nehekhara Ushabti, towering statues of lion-headed, jackal-macked warriors, animated by the will of their masters, descended upon the valley like a storm of living stone. Sikhet moved first. Her new form, faster than a mortal, more fluid than a lich, surged forward, her fingers weaving into claws of black mist, her body twisting into a shape that was not bound by flesh or bone. She met the first Ushabti head-on, shattering its stone face with a single strike, its golden mask crumbling as it fell. Another swung its massive bronze axe and she flowed around it, reforming behind it, her shadows lashing out like serpents, tearing through its core, unraveling the magic that bound it together. The others joined the fight. Idris's men rushed into the fray, their swords meeting the unholy steel of the Tomb Kings, cutting through bone, though their wounds meant nothing to the dead. The nomads fought like ghosts, moving between the ranks of the enemy, their weapons blessed by forgotten gods, their spears burning with the last remnants of a faith long forsaken. And the forsaken undead, the wraiths of Harach, the broken remnants of the old world, descended upon their former kin, ripping souls from bodies, consuming the essence of their once brothers in undeath. The battle was carnage. But the dead did not break easily. For every soldier of Aken-Ra that fell, another rose from the sands, reassembled by the will of their king. For every blow struck, the armies of the Tomb Kings pushed forward, their endless ranks refusing to falter. And then he came, the arrival of Aken-Ra. The sky darkened. The air became heavy, thick with sorcery. And at the crest of the battlefield, standing upon a chariot made of black gold and obsidian, his form wrapped in the divine power of undeath itself, was Aken-Ra. His eyes burned with emerald fire, his ancient robes flowing in a wind that did not touch the mortal world, his scepter crackling with energy. He spoke, but it was not a voice, it was a command that echoed across the battlefield, across time, across the realms of life and death itself. Sikhet, your defiance ends here. And with one motion of his hand, the skies split apart. Lightning of raw necrotic energy crashed into the valley, obliterating entire squads of Idris's men, sending the nomads scattering, forcing even the forsaken wraiths to recoil. The battlefield was drenched in raw death magic, a power beyond leeches, beyond priests, beyond kings. This was the wrath of a god, and he had come to erase her. The last stand. Sikhet stood amidst the ruin, her forces dying around her, the battle spiraling into chaos. She looked upon her former king, upon the one who had once commanded her, ruled her, shaped her, and she knew this was the end. But it would not be his victory. Sikhet clenched her shadow-wreathed fists, and the darkness around her responded, pulsing with a power that was neither life nor death. For she was no longer bound. She was not a servant. She was not a queen. She was something else, and she would show them all what that meant. With a final cry, she surged forward, meeting the full power of a Tomb King's wrath head-on. Let him try to destroy her, for she had shattered her chains. And now she would shatter him. Chapter 16. The Battle at the Edge of Oblivion. The sky burned with emerald fire, torn apart by the sorcery of the Tomb Kings. From the dunes beyond, an endless army of the dead surged forward. Nehekhara skeletons clad in golden armor, carrion beasts circling overhead, and constructs of war, colossal statues brought to life by magic as old as the sands themselves. They marched without hesitation, without fear, without mercy. This was not a battle. This was annihilation. And at their center, riding upon a chariot of obsidian and gold, was Aken-Ra himself, his form wreathed in the divine power of undeath. His voice carried over the battlefield, a voice that had commanded empires, that had ruled even beyond death. There is no place for you in this world, Sikhet. You are an abomination. His words crashed against her like a hammer, but they did not break her, because Sikhet was no longer his servant. She was something else entirely. And now the world would see what she had become. The legions of the dead. The first wave of skeletal warriors charged forward, shields locked, spears raised in perfect formation, their movements synchronized by the will of their king. They should have been unstoppable, but as they reached her forces, something went wrong. The shadows at Sikhet's feet stirred. They rose, writhing like living tendrils, seeping into the ranks of the dead. Amen. The skeletons halted. Their weapons lowered, their shields fell. For the first time in thousands of years, the undead hesitated. They turned toward her, their eyes flickering with something unnatural, not the cold blue flames of Nehekhara magic, but something else, a darker fire, a hunger. They turned against each other. Spears plunged through rib cages, swords cleaved through skulls, shields shattered under the weight of betrayal. Sikhet watched as the legions of Aken-Ra broke apart, their bindings severed by a force that had no master. Not undeath, not life, something in between. She had not commanded them. She had corrupted them. Her power did not bind the dead. It unmade them. The constructs of war. Aken-Ra snarled, raising his staff. "Destroy her!" The ground trembled. From the dunes, the great war statues of Nehekhara marched forward, massive constructs shaped in the images of lions, jackals, and falcons, their stone limbs grinding against the weight of time, their enchanted weapons glinting with deadly light. The largest of them, a necrosphinx, towering above all else, unfurled its colossal wings, its massive scythe-like claws gleaming in the stormlight. It was not bound by the same magic as the skeletons. It could not be turned. It could only be destroyed. The necrosphinx leapt, its immense form casting a shadow over the battlefield. Sikhet raised her hand, and the shadows answered. The darkness beneath her surged upward, twisting into jagged spikes of pure void. The necrosphinx crashed into the mid-air, its stone body impaled upon the shifting spears of shadow, its ancient enchantments screaming as they unraveled, its once invincible form cracking apart like brittle clay. It let out a final, deafening roar before collapsing into ruin, the magic that had once animated it devoured by something older than even Nehekhara's gods. Sikhet stepped forward, her form wreathed in black flame, the sand beneath her feet turning to ash. She was no longer simply fighting the Tomb Kings. She was consuming them. The wrath of Aken-Ra. Aken-Ra watched his forces crumble. He watched his skeletons turn upon one another, his war constructs shattered, his sorcery failing where it had never failed before. He had seen heretics, traitors, usurpers, but he had never seen this. And for the first time in centuries, a Tomb King knew uncertainty. But uncertainty was not fear, and Aken-Ra was still a god in undeath. His staff slammed into the earth, and the sky tore open. From the heavens, a storm of necrotic lightning descended upon the battlefield. The moment it touched the ground, the fallen warriors rose anew, but not as the corrupted undead Sikhet had broken. They rose as something else, something bound directly to Aken-Ra's will, creatures of raw, unfiltered death magic. They no longer needed bones. They were pure rage, pure vengeance, a force that did not obey the laws of life or death. And they came for her. The first bolt of dark energy struck Sikhet directly, sending her crashing backward, her form shattering stone as she hit the ground. Pain. Real pain. For the first time since she had changed, she felt the agony of being torn apart. The chains of Aken-Ra were gone, but she was still his enemy. And now, he had finally turned his full power upon her. The breaking point. Sikhet struggled to rise, the world swimming around her, her new form flickering, unstable. She had never fought a god before. She had never tested the limits of what she had become. And now, as the revenant storm of Aken-Ra's wrath descended, she knew she would either ascend to something greater, or she would be erased. There was no middle ground, no surrender, no retreat. This was the edge of oblivion, and Sikhet embraced it. She rose to her feet, the shadows swirling violently, the last of her human form peeling away, leaving only something dark and unknowable. Her eyes, no longer flames, no longer empty sockets, burned with an abyssal glow. She lifted her hands, and the storm bent around her. Aken-Ra's will met hers, his power clashing against the force that had unmade her. For the first time, he realized he was not fighting a priestess, not a heretic, not a traitor, but something new. Sikhet took a step forward, and the shadows of the battlefield surged with her. She did not serve the dead. She did not fear the gods. She was not bound by anything but her own will. And now she would show Aken-Ra what that truly meant. Chapter 17. The Fall of a King. The battlefield was a storm of death and shadow, where the sands of Nehekhara had been torn apart by the fury of gods and the defiance of one who should not exist. The armies of the Tomb Kings were in ruin. Their war beasts lay broken, their constructs shattered, their once unbreakable ranks of skeletal warriors reduced to twisting, corrupted husks. The last remnants of Idris's men, the nomads, and the forsaken undead still fought in the distance, but the battle had already shifted. Everything had been reduced to one final confrontation. Sikhet versus Aken-Ra. Master versus betrayer. Tomb King versus something beyond undeath. The duel of the damned. The moment she stepped forward, Aken-Ra unleashed his wrath. The sky itself screamed, the air cracking apart as a maelstrom of necrotic lightning slammed into the earth. Sikhet moved like a shadow, weaving between the deadly arcs of energy, her new form shifting and twisting, her movements no longer bound by the weight of bone or the stiffness of undeath. Aken-Ra descended from his chariot, his staff wreathed in flame, his golden death mask radiating unholy power. "You should not exist," he hissed. Sikhet grinned, a reflex she had not felt in centuries. "And yet here I am." He struck first, swinging his obsidian staff in a downward arc. The weapon clove through the air, its edge wreathed in the divine will of a god-king, enough to sever souls from bodies, to unravel even the strongest of the undead. Sikhet did not dodge. She caught the strike with her bare hand. The moment the staff touched her palm, the shadows writhed, devouring the magic, twisting it into something else. Aken-Ra's eyes burned with fury. She was not resisting his power. She was unmaking it. And then she struck back. A king's soul in chains. Her fingers, no longer flesh, no longer bone, lashed out, and dark tendrils of power wrapped around Aken-Ra's chest, his arms, his throat. He snarled, wrenching free, but for the first time he staggered. For the first time, he felt his own soul being pulled upon. "Impossible," he spat. "No leech can do this. No magic can touch the soul of a king." Sikhet tilted her head. "You still don't understand, do you?" She surged forward, her form a blur of unnatural movement, her claws slicing across his golden armor. The hieroglyphs of protection upon his body crumbled upon impact. His enchantments, the spells that had kept him bound to undeath, that had preserved his will across centuries, began to shatter. For the first time in millennia, Aken-Ra felt weakness. And he knew fear, the breaking of a tomb king. He roared, his fury shaking the battlefield, the sand beneath them rising into a swirling storm. "You think you can unmake me? I am the last breath of the gods. I am the ruler of Zan-Sutek. I am eternal." Sikhet laughed. "No, Aken-Ra," she whispered. "You are chained." With one final motion she lifted her hand and tore into his soul. The shattering of chains. Aken-Ra screamed, not in pain, and realizing, for the first time since he had been bound to undeath, he felt something he had forgotten even existed. Joy. Sakir had done the impossible. She had not simply attacked his body. She had attacked the binding magic upon his very existence, the same magic that had shackled the tomb kings, that had kept them enslaved to their own eternal wills. And as she unraveled it, she felt it. Aken-Ra's true self, buried beneath the weight of undeath, power, pride. And beneath it all, the faintest flicker of his mortal soul, the man he had once been, before the rituals, before the crown, before the chains of eternity. That man had been lost for centuries, and now for the first time, he saw what he had become. He saw what she had become. He saw the lie of their existence. And in that final moment, Sikhet whispered, "You could have been free." Aken-Ra collapsed to his knees, his golden staff falling from his grasp, his entire form trembling. The power of undeath flickered within him, unstable, breaking apart at the seams. And then his body crumbled, not like the others, not like a leech turning to dust, not like a king returning to his grave. He simply ceased to be. His existence came undone, his soul untethered, his will shattered. And the tomb king of Zan-Sutek was no more. The end of an empire. The battlefield fell silent. The armies of the tomb kings, still locked in battle, froze where they stood. The moment their master's will broke, so too did their bindings. Without the force of Aken-Ra's soul holding them together, the warriors of Zan-Sutek collapsed, their bones disintegrating, their weapons turning to dust. The last remnants of his empire crumbled in an instant. And Sikhet, standing amidst the ruin, felt nothing. Not joy, not satisfaction. Only the weight of what she had done. She had broken a tomb king's soul. She had done what no priest, no god, no mortal had ever done. She had unmade him. She turned, her gaze shifting to the remnants of her forces, those who had survived, those who had witnessed what had just occurred. Idris, the nomads, the forsaken undead. They all looked at her with the same expression. Not fear, not hatred, not awe, but uncertainty. Because now they all knew she was not one of them. Not a lich, not a tomb queen, not a god. She was something new, and no one knew what that meant. Not even Sikhet herself. What comes next? The battle was over. The war had ended before it had even truly begun. The tomb kings would not forget this day. They would remember the one who had severed a soul. Sikhet. Sikhet had finally proven the truth. The chains of undeath could be broken, but now she stood upon the edge of something even greater. Something unknown, For the first time since she had forsaken her mortality, she did not know what lay ahead. But she would find out. One way or another. Chapter 18. The Silence of the Dead. Zan-Utek was dying. The greatest necropolis of the south, the jewel of Nehekhara rule, the city that had endured millennia of war, decay, and forgotten gods, was now crumbling into the sands from which it had once risen. The sky above it was dark, not with clouds, not with sorcery, but with the absence of presence. Aken-Ra was gone. His soul had been unmade, his will shattered, his empire broken in a way no tomb king had ever suffered before. Sikhet stood at the edge of the ruins, watching. She did not move. She did not speak. For the first time in thousands of years, Zan-Utek was silent. The collapse of a kingdom. The city's pyramids, once symbols of eternal rule, now fractured, their obsidian and limestone surfaces splitting apart, the power that had held them together for centuries crumbling into dust. The statues of Aken-Ra, of the gods of the great kings that had ruled before him, shuddered and fell, their once imposing forms breaking like old bones as the last of their master's sorcery faded from the world. The streets, once crawling with the dead, were now empty, littered with the remnants of collapsed skeletons, their armor still gleaming but their bodies reduced to meaningless fragments. The grand palace of the Liche priests, where rituals had been performed, where the will of the tomb kings had been enforced, where she had once knelt in servitude, was now nothing but a hollow ruin, its walls shaking as if mourning its own demise. This was what happened when a god-king died a true death. Not a retreat into his sarcophagus, not a slumbering return to the tomb, but a ratio. Without his will to sustain it, Zan-Utek was nothing, and neither were its people, the last of her kind. Sikhet had known many things in her time. She had known devotion when she had stood among the priests of the Mortuary Cult, preparing the tomb kings for their eternal rule. She had known obedience when she had followed Aken-Ra's commands, bending the laws of death itself to raise legions in his name. She had known doubt when the chains of her servitude had first begun to fray, when she had questioned what it meant to be undead yet unfree. She had known pain when she had severed herself from her king, when she had become something beyond a lich priest, something neither alive nor truly dead. And now she knew what it was to be alone. Because she was the last. The leech priests of Zan-Utek were gone, their bindings undone, their very essence torn away with Aken-Ra's fall. The warriors who had served him, who had marched under his banners, who had defended his name with unthinking loyalty, were nothing but bones scattered in the sand. Even the lesser undead, the nameless wraiths and ancient servants that had once whispered in the tombs, were gone. They had no will of their own, and now nothing remained to sustain them, except for her. Sikhet should not have still been standing. She should have collapsed with the rest. She should have faded with her kin, with her master, with the kingdom that had shaped her. But she hadn't. She had not been bound by his will. She was something else now, and that meant she was the only one left, the ghost of an empire. A cold wind stirred the dust around her, shifting the fragments of shattered stone, lifting the scraps of ancient banners, the once proud sigils of Zan-Utek torn and meaningless. The sands would bury it all soon. The world would forget this place, as it had forgotten so many others. And yet, Sikhet could still hear it. Not voices, not whispers, but something deeper, quieter. The lingering presence of a city that had existed beyond its time, now fading into true death. She felt something beneath her feet, something that made her hesitate. It was not power. It was not sorcery. It was memory. The memories of all those who had lived and died here. She could almost see them. The priests who had once prayed at the temples, the warriors who had marched through the golden streets, the nobles who had laughed beneath shaded courtyards, drinking from cups of lapis and gold. Once, Sutek had been alive, not just in undeath, but truly alive. And now, Sikhet was the only thing left to remember it. Her kind were gone. Her kingdom was gone. Even her purpose was gone. And for the first time, she did not know what to do. What remains? She stood at the edge of the ruins, staring out across the endless desert. The war was over. There was no army left to fight. There was no throne left to defy. She had won. But at what cost? For all the freedom she had gained, for all the power she had uncovered, what did it mean if there was nothing left to fight for? She turned, looking back at the ruined city, the place that had once been her home, her prison, her kingdom. And she spoke not to the dead, not to the gods, but to the silence itself. So this is what remains of us. The wind carried her words into the abyss of history. No answer came. Because there was no one left to answer, Sikhet stepped forward, leaving the last remnants of Sutek behind. She had shattered the chains of undeath, but now she had to decide what to do with the freedom she had won. The world was waiting, and for the first time it was hers to walk alone. 2/2 Chapter 19. A Choice Beyond Death. The wind howled across the ruins of Sutek, carrying the last remnants of a broken empire into the shifting dunes. Sikhet stood alone at the edge of oblivion. The war was over. The chains that had bound her were gone. The empire that had ruled over undeath itself had crumbled into nothingness. And now, for the first time since she had drunk from the cup of eternity, since she had sacrificed her flesh, her soul, her freedom to serve a king who no longer existed, she was left with a choice no undead had ever been given, a choice beyond death itself. The path of the living. She could continue. She could walk forward, leave the ruins behind, and carve something new out of the ashes of the past. But what would that be? She was not mortal. She could never be part of the living world again. The humans who had fought beside her, Idris, the nomads, the forsaken tomb robbers, they had looked at her with fear in the aftermath of the battle. Not because she had won, not because she had destroyed Aken-Rare, but because they had seen what she had become. Not a Liche, not a queen, not a god. Something else entirely. She had shattered the laws of undeath, broken the chains that bound the dead to their eternal servitude. And yet she could still feel the power within her, coiled like a serpent in her core, something not meant to exist in this world. She would always be an aberration, a thing that did not belong in life or in death. So what was the point of trying to exist at all? What was the point of freedom if she had no place left to go? The call of the afterlife. And then she felt it. A pull, faint, distant, but there, like a whisper in the farthest reaches of her being. She had not felt it in 1,000 years. The afterlife. For so long it had been denied to her. The gates of the underworld closed, her soul bound to the laws of undeath, forced into servitude, unable to pass into the lands beyond. But now she was free, and without chains, the gates had begun to open. She could see them now, not with her eyes, but in the depths of her mind, shimmering like a mirage at the edge of the world. The river of souls, winding through the eternal paradise of Nehekhara, where those who had lived and died were welcomed by the gods. She could hear their voices, not whispers of the dead, not echoes of the cursed. These were the voices of those who had passed beyond the veil, those who had found peace. She could be one of them. All she had to do was let go. Let the power within her fade, let her soul drift into the embrace of eternity. She had fought for so long. Would it not be easier to rest, to finally be free of everything? The war in her soul. But something held her back. Something deep within her refused. Was it fear? Was it pride? Was it the sheer rage of existence? The refusal to be erased after everything she had done? She had defied the gods. She had unmade a king. And now she was to simply walk away? No. Her hands tightened into fists, her form flickering between shadow and substance, caught between the pull of the afterlife and the weight of existence. What was she, if not a survivor? What was she, if not a force that refused to be bound? For all her years of servitude, she had never been given a choice. Now she had one, and she refused to let it be fate that decided for her. She stepped away from the light, away from the call of the afterlife, away from the promise of rest, and she turned her gaze back to the world of the living. A new purpose. The dead had ruled for centuries. They had enslaved the souls of their own people, believing that power was owed to them, believing they had the right to rule beyond the grave. Sikhet had been part of that system. She had believed in it. But now she saw the truth. The world did not belong to the dead. It did not belong to tomb kings or leech priests, nor did it belong to gods long forgotten. It belonged to those who still fought for it, to those who refused to be chained. She had thought for so long that undeath was the only path, but now she understood it was never supposed to be. It had been a perversion of fate, a twisting of the natural order, and she had the power to undo it, the power to sever the chains of others, to break the curse of undeath itself. A smile, small, sharp, formed across her inhuman features. She had chosen. She would not pass into the afterlife. She would not fade into history. She would walk the world once more. And when the tomb kings learned that one of their own had survived, truly survived, they would tremble. Because Sikhet was not done. Not yet. The road ahead. As the ruins of Zansutek vanished behind her, she walked alone into the desert. The living feared her. The dead despised her. But she no longer needed their approval. She had become something new, and in time they would all learn what that truly meant. For undeath had taken everything from her. And now she would take something from it. Chapter 20. The Road Unwritten. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a sea of gold and shadow beneath the dying light of the sun. Sikhet walked alone. Behind her, the ruins of Zansutek lay in silence, an empire reduced to dust and memory. The kingdom that had ruled over death itself was no more. The chains that had bound her for centuries were broken, and for the first time in over 1,000 years, she was truly free. But what did freedom mean? What did it mean for one who had spent her entire existence in servitude, first to the gods, then to her king, then to the endless weight of undeath itself? The world did not have a place for her. Not among the living, for she was no longer mortal. Not among the dead, for she had shattered the very laws of their existence. So where did she belong? She did not know, and perhaps that was the point. The weight of a choice. For days, weeks, she walked. The desert was different now. It had always been a graveyard, a place where the living dared not linger, where the sands had long been ruled by the dead. But now the balance had shifted. She could feel it, stretching across the dunes, through the crumbling ruins, through the remnants of kingdoms lost to time. The tomb kings would feel it too. They would sense the absence of Akhenra, of Zansutek, of the power that had once commanded thousands of deathless warriors. They would know that something had changed, that something new now walked the sands. Sikhet felt the weight of that realization, but she did not fear it. They could hunt her. They could curse her name, but they could no longer control her. For the first time, she was not bound by anyone's will but her own. And that meant everything. At the edge of the world, on the 12th night, she reached a place where the desert ended, where the sands met the edge of a vast chasm, a canyon so deep that the bottom was swallowed in darkness. She stood at the precipice, staring into the void below, the wind howling around her like a chorus of forgotten voices. And she heard it again, the call, the whisper of the afterlife, distant but persistent, tugging at the last remnants of her soul. She could step forward. She could let go, allow herself to drift into the river of souls, to finally leave behind everything she had fought to escape. No more battles, no more wandering, no more uncertainty, just peace. And yet, she did not move, a fate unwritten. She could go forward into the unknown, or she could turn back, walk the world as something new, something neither dead nor alive, something the gods themselves could not predict. The choice was hers alone, and that was the most powerful thing of all. For the first time since she had abandoned her mortal name, her mortal life, her mortal soul, there was no prophecy to fulfill, no king to serve, no god to obey. She did not know what lay ahead, and perhaps that was the point. She was free, and whatever happened next, she would decide. And